Malpractice in midwifery is an interesting subject in and of itself because unless the midwife is involved in more of a traditional large community hospital type of environment and they're part of that medical machinery, the relationship between midwives and their clients, their patients, and the families at large are usually such a deeper relationship, and there's a bond that happens between a midwife and their families. And Ginger runs into people that she's helped deliver decades ago, and they'll somehow know her, but they don't get sued as much. So the studies have long said that medical malpractice, one of the better meters on whether or not you're going to get sued a lot, has to do with your relationship, your bedside manner. When you truly bond with people, care about people, and work with people in a respectful fashion, that's probably the most demonstrative way in which you can cut down on malpractice liability. It doesn't free you from having made mistakes. The next is how you respond to having made a mistake. As we see in so many contexts, what happens after the key event and how people respond to the key event is as formative on how that conflict's going to be managed or how we're going to go to the next step after having experienced an unexpected outcome as anything else. So those two answers are probably fairly surprising to a lot of people. How do you manage malpractice? Well, I'm going to put third, competency in your profession, because it is true that if you are really kind to people and support and have a professional relationship with the people you're serving, they respect that and they're less likely to turn around and sue you. It's also true that if you respond honorably to mistakes that you've made, that people are less angry and do tend to want to not go forward and file lawsuits. And then finally, the competency is without question something very, very important. Then your working environment. You have to make sure that you're working within an environment that is safe for you to practice, but also where your ability to practice and to transfer responsibility to different specialties. In midwifery, we have our collaborative practice agreements, and those collaborative practice agreements regulate and meter when it goes to physician care, back to midwifery care, and around. So those elements are really important. And then the malpractice coverage itself is important. You have to look to what the limits are. You usually see two numbers. 1 million, 3 million would be one example, or 10 million, 30 million. And the first number is each occurrence. So if something happens for one particular patient, that's that limit of liability that the company has. The next number is the aggregate, which means over the life of that policy, usually 1 year, you have up to 30 million or up to 3 million of coverage to cover. And if you think about that, perhaps something happens to both mother and child during the delivery, that would be two separate claims probably. So having an adequate amount of coverage is important. Then understanding the type of coverage you have is also vital. There's claims made and occurrence made coverage. Occurrence is you're covered if whatever the act or omission is occurred while you were under the coverage of that policy. So if you had something that happened, and let's say a neurological injury for a child, and that happened on your 4th day of employment, but nobody sues until 5 years later. Maybe they didn't discover it or understand the importance of it, or other people change their mind. And if you have that and an occurrence policy, the policy may have gone by the wayside, or you may no longer be employed with this employer, but you would still be covered. So there's no need for what's called tail coverage. Claims made coverage, on the other hand, only covers the claims of the trespass that occur during the policy period. So you have to have a coalescence of both the occurrence, the act or omission, and then you have the issue of was the claim made in enough time. And it's a little bit like your automobile insurance policy or homeowner's policy. You know, the storm may have come by and damaged one of the two, But if you don't file the claim until after you've let the policy lapse, you're not going to have any coverage. So one of the things that you have to monitor to reduce your liability is that if you're aware that there is a potential lawsuit, say you are aware that there was an unexpected outcome in this birth, to self-report to your insurance policy so that you put them on notice that there is a potential claim. They know, they want to be reported so that they can tell you what to do and how you respond to the lawsuit. But it also covers you so that you've marked your spot, and you then will have your coverage. If you don't have, often we have lawsuits over things that we would never dream we had lawsuits over, and maybe we didn't even do anything wrong. So the tail coverage is a concept of you terminate a relationship with the insurance company for whatever reason, and that's most likely because you're terminating your relationship with the employer. Your claims-made policy only covers your period of time in which you're in an economic relationship with that insurance company. The tail coverage then is a rider or an additional portion of that policy that then turns around and covers those claims. And the thing about it is people think tail coverage is tail coverage, but it comes in increments of periods of time. A 1 year, 3 year, 5 year are very common increments. Those are real handy for professional relationships that have a statute of limitations that mold conveniently. For instance, as an attorney, I'm probably going to fit most times within a 1 or 2 year for a malpractice, and at the most it's going to be 5, which is a contract. These periods of time, these statutes of limitations vary by state, so you always have to look to local state law. But that's the limit of my liability. The problem with midwifery is not only do you have a longer period of time in which you may have discovered a problem because you have an infant and then they begin to start motoring around and then you try to find out why things aren't right. But you also have the problem that the victim of the act or omission might be the infant, and they still can sue in their own right once they reach majority. So then you're looking at a liability range that can go up into 20 years or so. And some tail coverages are literally just tail. It's just there's no period of time for it. You've paid for or earned the right. For example, in Kansas, we have what's called the Healthcare Stabilization Fund, and one of the reasons why healthcare professionals want to be part of that fund is if you practice for a statutorily set period of time, then you have free tail coverage from that point on covered by the fund. So, a lot of physicians especially, and now midwives have recently gotten in there, really want to keep that going for as long as they can so that period of practice that they were covered there has free tail. So it's really an important element. Then, beyond that, you can also come up with other levels of coverage. You can buy your own malpractice coverage in addition to your employer's as a second layer, which is not that expensive. There are a lot of companies that sell it for nurses in general. And you can also use other forms of insurance, such as an umbrella policy on your home, to cover other claims that may not be covered in a malpractice environment. For example, a claim of some sort of sexual trespass or impropriety might more be covered by your umbrella policy, which believe it or not, are not that expensive to obtain, that you add on to your homeowners or other sorts of policies so that you have another kind of insurance with a different scope. If you think in the sense of Venn diagrams, you have that sort of idea where there's a gap.